Okay, Torah concept in the New Testament, take the shield of faith. So Paul's shield of faith, we read in Ephesians 6:16, imagery, reflects the Torah's portrayal of God himself as Israel's shield and the call for Israel to trust in his protection. Faith in the Torah terms is covenantal reliance, trusting God's character, promises, and presence as a true defense against danger. So the Torah parallels to the shield of faith. One, the shield of his people. God himself is Israel's shield. The foundational Torah parallels that God is the shield of his people. Okay, so Genesis 15 and Deuteronomy 32 and 33, we read this. 2, faith is trust in God's word and covenant. The Torah defines faith not as abstract belief, but as trusting in God's promises and acting accordingly. In Genesis 15, Exodus chapter 14, and Deuteronomy chapter 1, we read about this. 3, God fights for his people when they trust him. The Torah consistently links divine protection to Israel's trust. Exodus chapter 14, Numbers 14, Deuteronomy 20. 4, faith extinguishes the attacks of the enemy. Paul says that the shield of faith extinguishes the fiery darts of the devil, right, the evil one. And the Torah uses similar imagery of God protecting his people from destructive forces. We read this in Numbers 23, in Deuteronomy 28, and chapter 32. Okay, so the context here is that Paul's shield of faith is not a new metaphor, but a direct continuation of the Torah's covenantal imagery. In the Torah, God is the shield and faith is the act of taking refuge in him. Israel's victories and failures hinge on whether they trust God's promises or succumb to fear. Paul applies the same covenantal logic to believers in Messiah. Faith is a protective barrier that stands between God's people and destructive assaults of the enemy. The shield is not human strength, but reliance on God's character, his presence, and the covenant faithfulness. So the core insight here is that the shield of faith that Paul is referring to here is Paul's Torah-rooted call to rely on God as a defender of his people. Faith is not merely belief, but covenantal trust, placing oneself under God's protective covering, just as Israel was called to do from the beginning. Again, this is how Paul taught Torah in the New Testament. The Torah has not passed away.